It's Wednesday, July 24. This is the news on PBCJ. I'm Carol Francis. A post-cabinet press briefing was held at Jamaica House this morning.
Specially trained teachers have been taken on board and we are continuing to recruit more and train more because the time has come to cauterize the steady growing situation where children are stuck in at a particular level, get frustrated, go into areas that may not even be appropriate for them. In this way, we hope to bring the entire cohort up to a level that is acceptable nationally. The PEP also enables us to take our place in the international educational community so that when we go to international conferences to talk about education and we give them the scores that we have achieved and where we are in education in all areas, essential areas, English language, mathematics, science, and social services, and the ability to reason. Once we take our place at that table, we can stand on our own international with pride because the level of assessment is universal. So we're not talking about a little bright child who has studied overnight and get a big mark, or a couple of them that get special treatment. This is a clear and honest reflection of the state of readiness and the level of training that our children have responded to. And so I think this is a game changer for this country of ours.
The government will be undertaking an educational campaign surrounding the Tourism Workers Pension Scheme. Minister of Tourism, the Honorable Edmund Bartlett, has already held meetings with workers in Kingston and Ocho Rios and intends to host sessions in Montego Bay and other areas across the country. The Tourism Workers Pension Scheme is in keeping with the government's focus on creating a social security network within the sector. The pension scheme is a defined contributory plan supported by legislation and will require mandatory contributions by workers and employers. It will cover all workers aged 18 to 59 years in the tourism sector, whether permanent, contract, or self-employed. Benefits will be payable at age 65 years or older. The Ministry of Tourism is providing $1 billion to seed the fund so that immediate benefits can accrue to qualified pensioners who have met the vested period of 5 years. Scientists say deep sea mining will cause irreversible harm to our oceans, which could result in extinction of some marine life. They argue it could also make climate change worse. Greenpeace activists are now in Jamaica. The protest coincides with the annual meeting of the International Seabed Authority underway at the Jamaica Conference Center in downtown Kingston. Marlon Samuels reports.
The Greenpeace activists in Jamaica are calling on governments to agree on a global ocean treaty. The treaty would protect oceans instead of negotiating rules that would allow deep-sea mining.
Greenpeace have sailed on our ship, the Esperanza. We've come directly from a place called the Lost City, which is in the middle of the Atlantic. It's an incredible underwater ecosystem. It was only discovered 20 years ago, but scientists think it may hold clues to the origins of life on Earth. So we wanted to come from this really iconic battleground because even though this place could show us so much about the deep sea, last year the International Seabed Authority contracted this out to the Polish government to explore for deep sea mining potential. We think that is totally the wrong course, and so we know that this is a really important meeting of governments. In 1 year's time they want to finalize the rules that would allow deep sea mining to happen. But at the same time, these same governments are at the United Nations negotiating a global ocean treaty, which could put a third of our oceans off limits to all threats, including deep sea mining, and it could raise environmental standards. So we think they should focus on that. We know that 1.5 million people around the world are calling for a strong oceans protection. We're delighted to be standing here alongside the Jamaica Environment Trust, who've shown that resource extraction is incredibly harmful on land. We should not be opening up our oceans to similar kinds of damage. It's simply a risk that is too dangerous.
The impact of extractive industries on our environment is terrible. You know, mining is never good for the environment, whether it's in the mountains of Cockpit Country or in the deep sea of the Atlantic Ocean.
The deep sea covers about half the Earth's surface and is home to a vast range of species. Deep sea mining could devastate fragile ecosystems that are slow to recover. Reporting for the news on PBCJ, I am Marlon Samuels.
Minister without portfolio with responsibility for land, environment and climate change, Darrell Vaz, says 40% of Jamaica is classified as forest. He pointed to the need to protect the country's forests, which provide habitats for animals, livelihood for Jamaicans. The forests also offer watershed protection, prevent soil erosion, and reduce the effects of climate change. The government is taking steps to protect and preserve the country's forest cover. They recently launched the Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation RED Readiness Preparation Project. The initiative is being implemented by the Forestry Department. A number of measures will be undertaken over the next 28 months under the project, including consultations with stakeholders and the preparation of a national RED strategy. In regional news, Guyana's Chief Justice has refused to grant an injunction that would put a stop to house-to-house registration, which began on the weekend. It's being done to create a new voters list. Elections are due to be held in September, following a no-confidence motion against the government.
That her interpretation of the CCJ judgments is that elections must be held by September the 18th, 2019. However, at this stage of the proceedings, she did not find it fit to stop the exercise on the ground that she is not yet satisfied that the exercise commenced will prevent elections from being held on that date. As a result, she ordered a further affidavit to be filed by us to provide such evidence.
All legal submissions are to be made by August 2. Attorney General Basil Williams says it's an offense for opposition leader Bharat Jagdeo to incite others not to cooperate with the registration process.
The opposition leader last Saturday announced that the opposition People's Progressive Party would not be cooperating with the national house-to-house registration exercise. Today, the Attorney General Basil Williams had this to say about that position.
It's an offense to tell people not to register. You need to register. If you don't register, you're guilty of an offense.
What are the
So if someone incites you not to register, they're counseling and procuring you to commit an offense.
The opposition leader had stated that the decision of the Chief Elections Officer, Keith Lowenfield, to proceed with the house-to-house registration process goes against the July 12th ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice, which urged GCOM and all the other political leaders to abide by the constitutional provisions of a no-confidence motion, namely elections in 3 months. The Attorney General said that despite the opposition of the PPP to the registration process, it is seeing results.
People are registering. Certainly in my area on the East Coast, all the villages, people are registering. So one thing is being said by the leaders, but the people on the ground, they are registering.
The Attorney General said that there have been reports of registration officers being threatened in certain areas, but that the security forces will be there to protect them.
Trinidad and Tobago's Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley has offered an explanation as to why he rejected calls by the Law Association to invoke Section 137 of the Constitution to have a tribunal set up to investigate allegations of misconduct against Chief Justice Ivor Archie. Reports link the Chief Justice to discussing security arrangement with other judges. He is also accused of attempting to fast-track housing development applications for various people. The Chief Justice has denied the allegations of discussing security arrangements with judges.
The Law Association has in its hands the Prime Minister's confirmation he won't trigger a tribunal. He'd first made the announcement to the media on Thursday, but in the letter dated July 22, 2019, it says, quote, having considered the various complaints, I have therefore determined that a representation to the President is not valid, end quote. In December, the Law Association presented a report including legal opinions of 2 Caribbean judges supporting the invocation of Section 137. Dr. Rowley tells the Law Association he understands he's not the one trying to resolve a conflict, but to decide whether the question of the CJ's removal ought to be investigated. The PM's letter to the association comes with the publishing of advice from Howard Stevens, QC, which was published on the OPM's website. As it relates to the allegation that Chief Justice Ivor Archie used his position to influence judges in favor of an associate's private security company, the legal advice says the alleged WhatsApp communication between Dillian Johnson and the Chief Justice could not be verified and so does not provide a sufficient basis for concluding that Section 137 ought to be invoked. And as it relates to HGC complaints, the Prime Minister denies receiving, sending or having any communication with the Chief Justice about any HGC house. He says, quote, "Clearly I cannot ignore this fact which effectively disposes this complaint," end quote. And as it relates to 2 other HGC complaints that the CJ used his position to influence the distribution of houses, while the Prime Minister says the Chief Justice is within his right to recommend housing, and quote, "Even if he went further than he ought to in relation to any applicant, it is unlikely that it could justify removal from office. It may have been a lack of judgment, maybe, but not misbehavior."
The Caribbean region is being warned not to fall into a false sense of security as it relates to terrorist attacks. We have more in this report.
Start of the CARICOM Impacts and Commonwealth Secretariat's Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism workshop at the Trinidad and Tobago Police Training Academy, Mr. Joseph said nothing justifies violent extremism and terrorism.
Technology enables terrorist groups to reach disenfranchised people everywhere in the world. A terrorist in Europe or Asia can provide instructions to an agent in Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Jamaica, or St. Lucia. One can be influenced, groomed, and recruited to terrorism on the internet. It is important to note that the vulnerabilities and gaps exploited by criminal organizations are equally susceptible to exploitation by terrorists.
Minister in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Fitzgerald Hines, said the return of some foreign terrorists is at times inevitable. This, however, results in serious risks for the country.
Because when they go to these regions and they get the training they do, like riding a bicycle, you don't forget how to ride the bicycle. Once you learn, it stays in you. And they would have developed all kinds of horrifying techniques to hurt and to cause damage and danger and to cause panic.
Joseph said nothing could ever excuse the indiscriminate targeting of civilians.
Violent extremism and terrorism is at odds with our values and our vision of a safe and prosperous community. The threat we face from violent extremism is real. It is serious, it is urgent, and it knows no boundaries. While CARICOM has been largely spared the horror of terrorist attacks, CARICOM should not linger in the false notion that the region is immune from terrorism.
In sports, injury-plagued all-rounder Andre Russell has been included in the West Indies 2020 squad to face India in August. He joins the veteran Sunil Narayan, who has been recalled following a near 2-year absence from the team. And that's our package. Join us again tomorrow, same time, same place, right here for more news and sports on PBCJ, the People's Station.